get your attention? Can I get everybody's attention? Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Brian Flanagan. I'm Associate Director of the Hauenstein Center, and it's my distinct honor today to welcome you to a new year at the Hauenstein Center's Cook Leadership Academy. I have to say that we couldn't be more thrilled to be reunited with so many of you, but also to see so many new faces out there. You make this a truly distinguished group, and we look forward to having a great year together. Now, in 1801, in front of a similarly distinguished audience, newly inaugurated President Thomas Jefferson made a harmonizing gesture. "We are all Federalists. We are all Republicans," he said. Except on football Saturdays when Notre Dame's playing Michigan. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Did he really say that?
60 years later, in his inaugural, Abraham Lincoln had a similar gesture. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies, unless Michigan is playing Notre Dame." Both advocated 364 days of love each year. And love is the theme of the day, chosen by our speaker, Professor William Noakes. We'll hear more about Professor Noakes and about his theme in just a few minutes. But for now, I just want to make sure we acknowledge Professor Noakes and thank him for joining us today. Thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge a few other special guests, especially over at the Colonel's table. We have Ralph Hauenstein himself. Without Ralph's example and Ralph's vision, this day in our center would not happen. So we couldn't thank you enough. I would also like to acknowledge at that table that we have John and Mary Beth Wardrop with us. Mary Beth and John's leadership is absolutely integral to what we do. And I have to recognize Gleaves Whitney, who's the director of the center. He's going to lead us this year and teach us many, many lessons that we'll look forward to. We have several advisory cabinet members and mentors with us today. If you guys could just raise your hands for a moment, we'd like to give you a round of applause as well. Advisory cabinet members and mentors. Thank you so much for your service. And we also have 21 brand new, spanking new leadership fellows with us today. 21 of them. And if you guys could raise your hands, we'd like to give you a warm welcome. All of us hope during your time here that you gain much of the knowledge, the inspiration, the contacts, and even more knowledge that you need. Now, the reason I use knowledge there twice is we want to use a good acronym, which is KICK. We want to give you guys KICK. So if you gain that, and hopefully if you guys can also find us a better word that starts with K for that second spot, then we'll be all set. Consider that a challenge. Finally, I would like to acknowledge our continuing leadership fellows and our lean and mean staff of 5. If you guys could raise your hands, our continuing fellows and staff, thank you so much. And I'll thank you in advance for another great year at the Hauenstein Center Leadership Academy. Now, that's all of the self-congratulation we have scheduled for this year. It's actually time to get down to business. And to make that happen, I'm going to ask Selma Tucker, this year's president of the Leadership Academy, to join me up at the podium. Now, Selma, as you know, was elected president by his peers, as were 3 other officers. I'd like them all to stand as well, our officers. If you guys could stand up. Anna Anderson, Ali Bush, Petra El-Soufi. Remember their faces, because you're going to see their names a lot. They're going to be organizing service projects. They're going to be organizing mixers for your groups. And they're going to be in touch. So remember them. Now, Selma needs no real introduction in this audience. But I'll say that he's been with us from the very beginning 3 years ago. He's an outstanding individual who brings energy, enthusiasm, and great ideas to every venture he adopts. And we have no doubt that Selma and his fellow officers will contribute greatly and have an enormous impact on the program this year. Some, thank you very much.
Wow. It's interesting being on the other side of this podium for the past 3 years, and then being here now is quite the turn, 180 degrees, I think. So I'm humbled and I'm honored to be with you today, to stand before you and to be able to open this year's Academy with Bill Noakes, sometimes known as Professor Noakes if you've had him in the classroom. What I'd like to do though is just say something really quickly to our first year. I know we've got a lot of returning fellows, including myself, the officers, and everyone else, but I like to pay particularly close attention to our first years. Since this is your first Leadership Academy luncheon, I want you to really open your ears and engage. Because what happens in these luncheons is you get a perspective from a seasoned veteran in leadership. And that perspective is from a very, very wide, multidisciplinary approach. You'll talk with Bill today, and you'll talk with many other leaders throughout this year. It's up to you to really engage this leader, ask him some very, very dynamic questions, and be thinking about the concept of leadership as you go through this year. This is something that will take you into every single facet of your life. As you continue your time here at Grand Valley, your home institution if you're not a student here at Grand Valley, and when you graduate, when you go into your first job, and beyond that. So that's my message for you first years this year. Engage. And without further ado, we're going to introduce Bill Noakes. Bill Noakes is first and foremost, I think he's a scholar. He got his undergrad at Notre Dame. Thank you, Brian. Brian and Bill share that alma mater. His undergrad was in German literature and government. He later went on to get his Juris Doctorate and Masters of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. You might see Bill Noakes in a number of different mediums. You might see him as counsel for General Motors, as a lecturer for the University of Chicago in their law school, or even as a professor right here at Grand Valley State University. We're so happy that Bill is with us today. Principally, Bill is a managing partner at Noakes Group that does counseling for information technology deployments and gives companies a real breadth of knowledge in connecting information technology into their business. Bill's prepared a wonderful speech for us today, and he's going to talk, I believe, a little bit about two concepts that I don't think are often intertwined: love and leadership. If you read this week's supplementary readings, then you'll see that clearly.
They did read them.
They did read them. They did. Yeah, we know you did because you got them beforehand, right? Great. So, without further ado, we will introduce Bill Noakes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bill.
Good morning, or is it? It's afternoon. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and it's a distinct honor to address such a distinguished group, particularly since Mr. Hauenstein is here. It's difficult for people to understand leadership, and it's difficult, even more so, for people to become good leaders. And because of Ralph Hauenstein and all the folks here, we hopefully will have a cadre of good young leadership as we move further into the 21st century. So I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Hauenstein and the rest of the folks who helped make this happen. All right. Now, I'm not one for standing behind the podium. And so let me ask a question. I mean, the subject today is love and leadership. Love and leadership. And some people might say, taking the words of the old Tina Turner song, what's love got to do with it? Really, what has love got to do with leadership? Now, I want to ask, Oh, let me see. I'm not hesitant about picking on people. Let me find somebody to ask. What's love got to do with it? I don't want to catch anybody with a mouthful of food. You're safe. Let's see. Oh, before you put the food in, what's love got to do with it? Who are you? Anna. What's love got to do with leadership? Trust and rapport?
Yeah.
Okay. What's love got to do with leadership? People are looking away. Yeah.
If there's no passion in what you're trying to do, then no one can take you seriously as what you're trying to do others to do.
Okay. One more. Let's see. One more. Who have I taken offense to? Are you done with the mouth roll? I love it. He's finally taking his mom's advice: chew your food 32 times before you eat. What's love got to do with it?
Well, I think it's a basic human need, and when that is fulfilled, I think you really have people that trust you and want to follow you.
When we fulfill on the human need of love, people will trust us and they will follow us. Okay, I'm done. That's it. You hit it. That 32 bites, that helped you come up with that. Well, let me say this. I want to move on and really talk to you about love and leadership. First thing is this. We are surrounded with love. Love occupies so much of our lives as human beings. Other than love and the ability to love, there might only be two other things that are unique to the human species. And that's the ability to intellectualize or to think. And the other one is a consciousness. We know who we are. I mean, I have a pet dog, a little Bichon. Don't laugh. He doesn't know who he is. He looks in the mirror and he's kind of like, oh, there's another dog over there for me to play with. We look in the mirror and we know who we are. Even as young as a few months. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my 2-year-old can look at photos and say, oh, that's me. And then he says, that's my brother John. That's Mommy. That's Poppy. That's the thing we do. But the thing that's paramount is our ability to love. So why isn't love a subject for business? Why isn't love a subject for leadership? We talk about strategy in leadership. We talk about statistics in leadership. And right now, one of the biggest things going on in business, particularly in the business world, is we measure everything. The Lord only knows why, because most of the time the measurements truly don't track back to what it is that you're trying to do. But we've got measures. And I think it all started because some guy that worked for the Boston Red Sox figured out that if he measured everything, then the Boston Red Sox could win the World Series, which they did, and everybody has been measuring everything ever since. Well, can we measure love? How's love coming into business? How's it playing leadership? Well, it really comes down to this. It is the ability to trust. And it's the ability to understand. It's the ability to empathize. But most important is it takes us away from a leadership style that has been practiced for far too long in American business and elsewhere. And that is leadership by fear. Leadership by intimidation. Anybody here familiar with that? Anybody ever worked in an environment where the leader
was somebody that you feared. You were in awe of the leader. You didn't dare approach and touch the hem of the leader's garment, lest something bad happened to you. Has that ever happened to anybody? Anybody here? Raise your hand. Yeah? Anybody want to talk about it? Is it somebody?
No, it is. Well, it definitely makes for a difficult working environment, and I don't think it's conducive at all to new thought or improvement in any way because you're terrified.
Absolutely. Fear cuts off thinking. Fear cuts off emotion. Fear cuts off this feeling of connectedness that all human beings want. We all want to be connected. I know I had one of the worst experiences in my life working for a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And he ruled by fear and by intimidation. And one of the sergeants that worked for us came to me and said, "Captain, this guy, this colonel is like crazy. And he doesn't understand that we can't get our jobs done if he comes in every day and says, well, did you do this? And he said, well, no, I don't want you to do this. I wanted you to do this. Well, what's wrong with you? Can't you get it right? And so I said to the sergeant, okay, let me go talk to the colonel. And I remember going out to talk to the colonel. And I said, well, yeah, I know you've been talking to Sergeant so-and-so, and it's been difficult for him. And he's trying to do what you're asking him to do. But he's afraid of you. And part of the fear is he doesn't know what you really want him to do because you say, I want you to do this, and then I want you to do that, and then, no, you were supposed to do this. Well, why didn't you do that? Why don't you get anything done, man? And I said, well, maybe you ought to establish some priorities for him. And then maybe you ought to just back up a little bit, sir, please. And just let him do his job. And then maybe he'll be better off, and the whole organization will feel better because no one will be afraid. And I remember seeing a color red, unlike any red that I had ever seen, as the blood welled up from the bottom of his shoes into his face. And then he looked at me and he said, and you! I was standing there, yes. And you didn't get done what I wanted you to get done. What was that? Well, I put it in your inbox yesterday, and it should have been back at my desk today. I said, well, sir, let me go look in my inbox. I went and looked in my inbox. There's nothing there. I said, well, it's not there. It was there yesterday, and I put it in there, and you should have had it done by now. All right. Well, let me look around the office. And so as I was looking around the office, the two of us shared an office, and my desk was on the other side from his. And then I said, well, you've got a box over there, and I only keep one box. I don't have an inbox and an outbox. I have one box so that I know if it's there, it needs to be worked on, and I can get rid of it. But he had an inbox and an outbox. So I said, well, let me look through here if you don't mind, sir. So I went to his inbox. Wasn't there. I looked in his outbox and leafed through a bunch of papers. Oh, is this the one that you wanted me to work on, sir? How did you do there? You put that back in there, didn't you? No, sir, I didn't. I just happened to find it in your outbox. Well, never mind. And then he got up and he said, yeah. That was the day that I decided I no longer wanted to be in the military. Not because I didn't enjoy the military, not because it wasn't something that I trained for. I did. Indeed, my father was in the military, my grandfather was in the military, my great-grandfather was in the military, and my great-great-grandfather was in the military. That was the day that I decided it's time for me to leave. That one overarching experience of poor leadership. And that wasn't leadership of love, that was leadership out of fear. And today, when we look around, and young people, there's so many of you in this room, how many of you would like to work for somebody that leads by fear? Anybody? What if they paid you $1 million a year? Would you want to do it? long would you like to do it? Just need 1 year. Now see, Solomon, you remind me of myself back in the 1980s, man. Because there was this guy, there was a heavyweight boxer named Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson was knocking everybody out. And I don't remember who it was. It was one of the, hey, it was Michael Spinks was going to fight him, and the purse was going to be $1 million. And a bunch of the guys just sitting around, we're like, I'm fighting for $1 million. You know? It's like, yeah, I'm fighting for $1 million. I said, come on, guys, you guys nuts. And my friend said, no, here's what will happen. They're going to give you $1 million. I'd train real hard. I'd get in the ring with him. And then the first time the first punch got anywhere close to me, I'd go down. I'd get my $1 million, and then I'd go home. And I said, well, what happened if you weren't able to dodge the punch? And, well, I still got my $1 million. But yeah, have you seen how hard this guy used to hit? He could knock out a horse. And if he hit you, your brain might be scrambled permanently. For $1 million? No, we wouldn't do that. We really wouldn't. And what we want is a different kind of leadership. And a different kind of leadership is a leadership based on love. And what are the elements of love? I don't mean like, you know, well, I want to kiss my boss. I want to love my boss. I mean like love in the sense of fellowship and understanding. Love in the sense of trust. Love in the sense of open communication. Love in the sense of openness and vulnerability. In the 1950s, in comic books, we had a hero named Superman. Superman was the perfect hero. Other than kryptonite, he had no vulnerabilities. None. Superman never cried. Superman was perfect. And in the 1960s, there was this publisher and creator, Stan Lee. And he decided that superheroes could be vulnerable. And so he began creating superheroes along the lines of Spider-Man, a troubled teenager. The Hulk, who was actually a great psychotic. Thor, the god of thunder, who was always having difficulties with his father, Odin. Heroes with vulnerabilities. One of the biggest lessons is, if you are going to be an effective leader, don't be fake. Be authentic. Be who you really are. And that means being vulnerable. It doesn't mean you go sit in the office and you, oh, our numbers are bad. It means being authentic, being who you are. And if you are not a great numbers person, don't pretend to be a great numbers person. Find a great numbers person to work for you or work with you. If you are not a great detail person, find somebody who's great with the details. If you are not a great people person, and I know none of you in this room are great people, as my 2-year-old say, people. But find somebody who is. We all have weaknesses. There are things that we don't do well. There are a lot of things that each of us does well. But we don't do everything well. Recognize that. And that is what I mean by vulnerability. And that's what I also mean by being authentic. You have to be who you are. Can't be somebody else. I mean, for me, to stand behind the podium, and for me to actually be, I'm actually wearing a suit and tie today, which is kind of unusual. I used to wear suits and ties all the time. And then when I started my consulting practice, I don't have to do that anymore. Ooh, thank goodness. Oh, I had to dig this one out. So like, oh man, I gotta find a tie that goes with it. Purple tie, purple shirt. Okay, we're in good shape. All right. But for me, authenticity is just being me. It's in the way I talk. And my wife sometimes says, you sound kind of country. Virginia. Okay, so that's kind of a little country. In fact, yesterday, it's funny because we went out to dinner last night. And my mother-in-law's with me, my wife's with me, and we got the 2 babies with us. And so we got to dinner, you kind of now. So my wife had gotten into the back seat, the far back seat. And it's like, I don't know if you're going to be able to get out between the 2 kids in the car seats. So I opened the tailgate and said, come on out. And she looked at me, I'm not getting out that way. I'm not going to do that. This is so country. People are going to look at us and they're going to think, oh my God, he's bringing the woman out of the back of the truck. It's like, well, I just thought it'd be easier for you to get out this way. Be who you are. Because if you're not, people will know. They won't trust you. And they won't follow you. Gone are the days when we can lead through command and control. Do this, and things flow downhill, and everybody does what they're supposed to do. It doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't. Nobody wants to do that because that says, okay, I should check my brain at the door. That means you have no respect for me as a human being and as a person who has a consciousness and can think. What we need more than ever in leadership are the ability of people to think for themselves. Sometimes it's a matter of coming up with, here's the problem. How do we address the problem? And getting the best out of the people that are there to think about the problem. Now, let's come back to love. Being open, being vulnerable, communicating, being understanding. What else? Respect. Okay, so, but how do we know if we're successful? How do we ultimately know if we're successful when we talk about leadership in the context of love? How do we know? Accurate.
We know when we see them trusting us and doing the same back in return. They're being vulnerable. They're showing you respect. They're just, it's a give and take, basically.
It's a give and take. I mean, one of the things that, and this is a lesson that goes back thousands of years. I mean, in Christianity, we talk about giving and receiving. We've always talked about that. And we talk about love. And Jesus said, I command you to love one another as I have loved you. And ultimately what it comes down to is that's really what we have to do as leaders, is we have to love our followers. And that means doing right by them. It doesn't mean that we don't hold them accountable. Because one of the things people will say about love and leadership, that's nonsense. Because there's no accountability. That's all that squishy stuff that some guy made up and wrote a book about. He's making a fortune. Well, you know what? You can't hold people accountable. Because if you love them, you will hold them accountable. How many of you have parents that held you accountable? They did it because they loved you. If they didn't, oh, you want to go out? You want to party all night? You want to get drunk? You want to run your car into a tree? Go ahead! I mean, what kind of, is that love? No, absolutely not. Holding you accountable. The other thing is understanding you and being empathetic. What do I mean by empathy?
Willing to understand where they're coming from and actually understand it as we kind of understand it.
Yeah, I mean, how many of you have faced a situation where you're talking to somebody and you're and then you say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. What'd you say? They didn't hear a word. That's not empathy. Empathy is being able to put yourself over in the shoes of the other person. And in order to do that, you got to listen to them. We talk way too much as a society. was Fred Meyer. And Fred talked a lot. Fred still talks a lot. But there are two things about Fred that I always appreciated. Fred talks in parables, much like Jesus Christ. Fred talks in stories. And when I started at Meyer in 1999, I had no idea. I mean, this guy's, he's coming in the office, he's talking. I'm going, okay. And then, after about 6 months, I realized he's telling me a story for a reason. The story is helping me to learn a business that I knew nothing about. Before 1999, I had never been associated with retail other than working in a warehouse of a company out east. But going to work for Fred, those stories helped me to understand retail, and more importantly, they helped me to understand people. And the fact that Fred led the company and built the company out of love rather than fear. Second thing is he listened very, very well. Because sometimes I'd say something and didn't think it had made a real impact on him. And then a year, 2 years would pass, and he'd come back and said, I was thinking about what you said to me a year and a half ago. I'm going, huh? Why? What did I say, Fred? And he'd be like, oh yeah, I do remember sort of saying something like that, okay. Yeah. But he listened very, very well. And that helped me to understand the business. That's some of the best leadership that I ever had. And one of the things that happened to me at Meyer that was probably the best experience I ever had is for years, Meyer worked on how do we get our costs under control. Year after year after year. When I came into Meyer in 1999, there was a program called Reduce Our Administrative Costs by 0.4% this year. This was in 1999. And before that, they had Run for One. They gave them all names. Run for One, which was to take out 1%. Strive for 5, which was to take out 0.5%. And they had, literally, dozens of these campaigns over the years. What do you suppose the result of those campaigns was?
A lot of change and confusion.
Were any of them successful?
Yes, no.
Absolutely. Not a lot of them was successful. And one of the reasons why was because we didn't understand something about leadership. First thing was, we didn't talk to anybody but ourselves. I mean, one of the worst things that can happen with leaders is when leaders all go into a room and they all sit around going, okay, that's a great idea. Okay, we're going to go out and do that. Okay. And, it's kind of like the Vatican when the Pope dies and they're naming the new Pope and everybody's standing outside waiting for the smoke. Okay, white smoke clears the hall. They got a Pope. Well, that's kind of the way some leaders have operated over the years. So we're going to have an off-site strategic session. And the leadership all goes, and they go somewhere, and they all sit in a room, and they go, think great thoughts. Then they come back. And they say to the people in the company, here's our new strategic plan. Go execute it. Everybody's going, huh? What? What did you do that for? Well, wait a minute. You didn't think about this. You didn't think about that. And then here's what happens. The leaders go away, and everybody goes over here in the hallway. Did you hear what these guys are talking about? Are they out of their minds? They have no clue what's going on in this business. Man, I swear, if they, I don't know. These guys, how do they get their jobs? Who did they know? Man, I swear, my kid brother, he's a loser, but he can run his business better than that. And that's what happens. But here's what happened the last time we did this at Meyer was 2003. We actually sat down and said, well, wait a minute, we've been having these offsites for years where it's just leadership. Do you think we might want to include some people who actually do the work? And we did. So ultimately, there were more people who were doing the work in the room than the leaders that were supposed to be leading them. And by listening to them and leaving rank at the door, we were actually able to come up with a plan that made sense. Respecting those who actually do the work, that's love. Listening to them, that's love. Allowing them to give input, that's love. And then when we left that room, instead of coming up with a plan where we're going to reduce our costs by 0.5% or 1%, or the leadership had figured we needed to reduce our costs by 2%. And I'll never forget, one of the guys who wasn't on the senior leadership got up in the middle of the meeting and said, "You guys are full of crap. If you reduce costs by 2%, you know what's going to happen? In 2 years, we're going to be back here again saying, we didn't reduce costs enough. What do we need to do to get another 2% out? And if all you guys want to do is reduce our costs by 2% at this point, then I don't want to be in the game. I want to leave now." Leadership was like, "Who is this guy? Oh my God, what's he talking about? 2%, we're going to be hard pressed to get 2%. He's talking about taking out 4%. So what we wound up doing was we actually listened to him. And we said, you know, he's right. He's absolutely right. We've got to take our costs down by 4%. And so that's at that moment where we sat down and said, that's what we got to do. We got to take our costs down by 400 basis points. And you know what the end result was? Want to know what the end result was? I got 5%. 6. We didn't get 5, we didn't get 6. We got 4. We got all of it. We got it in 3 years. Which is why Meyer is still here and successful. Had we not done that, had we not led from love rather than fear, and I don't mean it doesn't have to be intimidation, it just has to be stupidity. Fear sometimes equals stupidity. Fear equals not listening. Fear equals not respecting the opinion of others. Love is the opposite of that. And we were ultimately successful. Very few companies that I know of have been able to take their administrative structure down, their SG&A down by 400 basis points in such a short period of time. Had that not happened, I can tell you this, Meyer would not be here. And that was because of a quote-unquote follower rather than a leader. But that follower was probably the best leader in the room because he called all of us to lead rather than to shirk our responsibility as leaders and say, well, we got 2%, we did the best we could. You don't win that way, and you don't lead that way. Now, for me, in my life, when I talk about love, I've been at my best when I've been a loving leader. When I cared about my people. When I cared about what they thought and I respected them. I've been at my worst when I was a fear-based leader, which sometimes can happen. It sometimes happens in my very own home. Just do what I told you! Poppy, I don't want it! Just do it! Do it! Do it! Poppy, I just want to be happy. That's what my 4-year-old says. Poppy, I just want to be happy. And sometimes I say to him, I want to be happy too. And I will be happy when you do what I tell you. So we don't always come from love. We try to. Because if we are open, if we are authentic, if we demonstrate that we're human, nobody loves Superman. We all love Spider-Man because he's kind of, he's not quite right. You know, I mean, the guy I really loved when I was a kid growing up, I mean, Spider-Man, Superman, he was too perfect. Who do you think I really loved as a hero? A little bit of a twisted guy.
So one of the villains?
No, too perfect. I mean, he lived his life as Bruce Wayne, where he's, super socialite, and he's rich, and he's got a butler, and I didn't know what a butler was when I was a kid. I grew up poor. Butler, what's that? I mean, he's got this guy that follows him around and puts his clothes on for him? Wow, that's kind of weird. Oh, what do you think?
I have no idea. Spider-Man?
No. Okay, I'm gonna be sexist here. I'm gonna go with guys. And I'm gonna tell you that right now. Because most of the girls I grew up with did read comic books. Almost all the guys did? I know. You're one of the guys.
I have no idea.
Come on, everybody knows.
Well, my favorite's Wolverine.
A woman after my own heart. I loved Wolverine. I love the fact that he had these wonderful adamantium claws that were like, it's kind of cool. I'd love to be able to make those. I remember taking wire hangers and, it's like I couldn't get them to retract though. Made it difficult to pick things up. But yeah, I mean, he was a guy that wasn't quite right. He was vulnerable. And he was in love with somebody that he couldn't touch. And isn't that amazing? He's in love with a woman that he can't touch. It's kind of weird. But he's vulnerable. So I like him. But be vulnerable, be open, be authentic, be who you are, care about your people, care about yourself. Show people who you are. If you are not in love with you, then you can't be in love with anybody else. The most dysfunctional relationships, whether they're personal or in business, are when the believer doesn't like himself or herself. It shows up in the workplace. So you gotta like yourself first. So, love yourself. And that's okay. You gotta start somewhere. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up and then I look forward to questions. Just make sure I cover everything that I want to cover. So, the last thing I want to say is, you got to be comfortable with emotion. You got to be comfortable with emotion. A lot of folks think that in leadership, you got to take emotion out. No, what you have to do is you have to put more positive emotion in. It's not about draining emotion out of anything. Because here's how life works. If you connect with people, there's some emotion that happens. And then they think about what it is that you're trying to do based on that emotion, that feeling. Then what happens is words get formed around that. And only after that can you get to actions. It starts with emotions. So if a leader comes in that's robotic, a robotic-like leader, yes, we will be doing this. Well, listen, what's wrong with him? This dude is not right. There's something wrong. Well, we have to be who we are. We've got to be real. And that means being comfortable with emotions. And sometimes that means crying. Sometimes that means demonstrating fear. Sometimes that means, it can mean a whole range of human emotion. I mean, one of the things that we don't appreciate, and this is a story from my brother who was in the Iraq War. And my brother talks about how he and several of the members in his unit, they were scared. They were scared to death because they were going in the Fallujah. And they shared that with each other. It wasn't like, I don't know if you've seen any of these movies like the movie Predator back in the day where Arnold and his crew, they're all like, man, we're going to blow everybody away. These guys are like, wait a minute, we're going to battle here and we're not sure what we're up against and we don't know where we are and we don't speak the language and it's kind of, get scared. And he said that was the first time that I actually felt connected to the members of my unit. We've been through training together. We've been through a whole lot together. We've gone on training together. We lived together. But that was the first time that we felt a human bond. And that's the way it is in the company. That's the way it was at Meyer. When we succeeded in that task that we had to do in 2003, there was a connectedness unlike any that I had seen in a long time. And when that happens, that empowers your organization and it empowers the leadership and the followers, because who knows when a follower is going to turn out to be a leader to be successful. That's the message for today. I'll entertain questions at the moment. Questions? Comments? Yes, ma'am, in the back of the room.
Thank you so much. My name is Petra Supi, and my question is, when we lead with that style, how do we make sure that leadership or that our style is not seen as fear? I have to repeat that. All right. My name is Petra Supi, and my question is, if we lead with the leadership style that you're talking to us about, leading with love and being vulnerable, all that things, how do we make sure that it's not seen as weakness?
If you're authentic, people will know you for who you are, and ultimately it's about being effective. And what people want more than anything else is effectiveness. They want to know that we're going to get this job done, whatever it is, as a company or as a group or as a team or as a project that you're working on. And I don't think anybody will mistake it for weakness. I mean, if you share with them what the goal is, what your expectations are, the fact that you're going to hold people accountable to getting this thing done, and you demonstrate these other aspects, people will understand this is all about who you are as a leader and who we are as people. And I don't think they'll mistake it for weakness. Other questions, comments?
My name is Alex Pulaski, and you talked a lot about leading with love, things like that. Well, leadership is hardly a solitary activity. You're leading a team, or you're leading in a group, in a community, something like that. How do you deal with other people at your own level that might have a different philosophy?
Well, the toughest thing, I think, in life is to lead a group of your peers, because there is no hierarchy that you can rely on. And so that's a very difficult task. But ultimately, it comes down to, if you are true to yourself, it will show up. And that will happen. It may not always be easy, and it's not. It really isn't. But what happens is as people see who you are, it will be harder on the first project than the second project. Because people want to see a consistency. And so if you are consistent in who you are and how you lead, people will see that and go, oh, that's how he is. And it works for me. So long as you make sure it works for your followers or the other members of the team, then I think it'll work out. Other?
My name is Rory Egger. My question is a bit more personal than the other two. I noticed University of Chicago's website, when you applied for grad studies, you wrote a letter to, I presume, the Dean of Admissions, about saying that you were missing out on a hardworking, interested student. And ultimately, I believe that you said that was what got you in. My question is, that kind of gumption, is that always, in that case, obviously pay dividends, but is it something that has always done that for you, or is it could potentially be perceived as being too audacious, I guess, but is that something that you've done throughout your life? And if so, is it something that's almost always paid off?
Life is way too short. And sometimes we let fear take a hold of us. And ultimately, it starts back, let me give you a story from 1963. My family lived in Washington, D.C. in 1963, maybe about 20 blocks from downtown, where the March on Washington took place and where Martin Luther King spoke. And I was 7 years old at the time. And I just finished reading this book on Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was an architect, he was a lawyer, he was a politician, he was president, he was the governor of Virginia, he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he wrote the Religious Rights of Man in Virginia. And so my dad and I were having a conversation. And he said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be a lawyer. My dad looked at me and said, well, son, why don't you do something that you can be? Well, what do you mean? He says, well, you're a Negro. It'll probably be hard for you to be a lawyer. And how do you get people to pay you and all that stuff? It's like, why don't you think about being something like a doctor or a dentist? I mean, the things where you could service the black community and so you'd have a future. And then the last thing he said was, or a certified public accountant. You want to blow the mind of a 7-year-old? What? I don't know what it is, but it doesn't sound very good. And so I said, well, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I want to be. I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to be a lawyer. And so I carried that through elementary school, junior high, high school, and that's what I was going to be. I didn't care what anybody thought. And so part of it is not letting the view of the world, somebody else's view, drive you, and not being afraid. And yeah, you got to be a little audacious. And when I applied to University of Chicago, I only applied to 2 schools. I applied to Notre Dame, and I applied to University of Chicago Law School. I got into Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was going to give me a full scholarship. So I was like, okay, I know what my fallback position is. I can stay here at Notre Dame, and they're paying for the whole thing. So when I really wanted to go to Chicago, in part because I was impressed by the faculty. I mean, it was like one of the most outstanding law faculties on the planet at that time. And so I'm sitting in my room one night, and it's like, okay, well, I have to let Notre Dame know in like 2 more weeks, otherwise I lose out. And so I sat in my room and I wrote a letter. I remember typing it out. Dean Basher, who was still there. He's no longer the dean of students, but he's still at the law school. Kind of funny, when I went back to teach, there he was, and we sat down and had lunch. It's like, oh yeah, I remember you. But, so I wrote this letter. And really it came down to, I've been accepted to another quality law school, and if you don't accept me, you are going to be facing the risk of losing one of the best students that your university will ever have. And I remember, signed it. I put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it. I took it downstairs, I dropped it in the mailbox. I went back up to my room, closed the door and said, oh my God, what have you done? Oh no! Oh my God, you're an idiot, what did you do? Fortunately, I mailed it before that feeling came across me, before that came over me. And 2 days later, I got a phone call. Hi, this is Dick Badger, Dean of Students, Dean of Admissions at the University of Chicago Law School. Hi, Dean. Well, I wanted to let you know that I got your letter, and we have your application, and we're considering it. And I said, well, when do you think we'll know? Well, it's going to go in front of the admissions committee, and they'll make a decision, and they'll let you know in the next couple of days. So, 2 days later, I get another phone call. Hi, this is Dick Badger. You've been accepted. All right. Years later, I remember I graduated from law school, and I sat down talking to Dean Badger. I said, hey, I never did figure out who was the admissions committee. He said, me. So a little bit of audacity does help. I mean, audacity has a place in life. If you're not audacious, you're not going to get some of the things you want. You're not going to achieve the successes that you want. And they come to you, not because you're arrogant or because of some overweening pride, but just because you want it. I mean, there is something known as the law of attraction. I mean, if there wasn't, I wouldn't be married to the woman I'm married to. I mean, because I remember seeing her and I said, ooh, I want her. And hey, turned out she wanted me too. It worked out. And that's what happens in life. So you gotta go after things. You can't just always go, well, that's a little harder. Hey, come on, Barack Obama's president of the United States. Come on, when he started running for president, we're like, this guy's nuts. There's no way. He hasn't even been in the Senate 2 years. In fact, he might not have been senator if he had listened to people in, he might not be president if he had listened to people in Illinois talking about running for the Senate. He was supposed to get killed by the Republicans in that Senate race. But the guy who was running on the Republican ticket, his life unwound when they found out that his wife, Jerry Ryan, who used to play on Star Trek and played in Shark, in their divorce, there were these little comments about, yes, he tried to take me to sex clubs. And it's like, ooh, how did that get into the newspaper? And his campaign unwound so fast, didn't matter that he was, a multi-millionaire. And so then all of a sudden, Republicans were like, wow, we don't have anybody running this guy around. Nobody's going to vote for him. They thought Republicans was going to win. So then they wind up going and recruiting Alan Keyes from Maryland. He didn't even live in Illinois. Well, they got a black candidate, we got to have a black candidate, let's bring Alan Keyes in. And Rock killed it. But for that, I don't know, the audacity of him thinking, I can do this, or yes, we can, he'd still be a state senator in Illinois. So yeah, be audacious. Other comments, questions?
Bill, don't you think that some leaders would back away from this love leadership concept because they think it would maybe compromise their ability to deal with a subordinate, if you will, when things aren't going well, to take corrective action? And it's like you're moving back and forth between tough person to, love person, that kind of thing. Isn't that one reason why we hide behind that? That in business, that was a problem I personally had.
John, I understand that. And that was something that I faced in my career, was the question of how do you deal with subordinates? And so for the longest time, one of the ways I dealt with subordinates was I kept myself apart from them. And in fact, even when I went in some positions, I said, okay, now I'm the boss. And that means that I'm not your friend. I can like you, I can be appreciative of who you are, but I'm not your friend. And ultimately that didn't work for me. It really didn't, because it created too much of a shield between me and the employees. And it was only later on when I felt comfortable saying, look, I can be your friend, but you also have to understand where that ends. And in the workplace, that means I can't just be friends with you, I have to be friends with everybody. Otherwise what happens is it looks as if I'm being partial to you, and that's the difficulty. And so for me, it was simply a matter of being who I was, which is I feel comfortable in love with my employees because I don't think I'm weak. And a lot of times where that fear comes in is we feel, oh, they're going to think I'm weak. Well, anybody who's seen me in business or seen me in the courtroom will not think that I'm a weak person. I mean, you can ask anybody that I've cross-examined in the courtroom, is he weak? Maybe when he's asleep. But that's about it. And so it's just a matter of, you got to recognize that, yeah, there's certain boundaries, but love is about holding people accountable. Love is setting clear expectations. And if you let people know that, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, and here's what you're doing, and here's what you're not doing, okay, well, they can still appreciate it. I mean, Fred Meyer had to fire a lot of people over his career. I fired a lot of people over my career. And it's just one of those things where, a lot of people still like me, even though I fired them. So it's a tough situation, but you just have to understand how you feel. And if you can be comfortable with it, then it will work. If you're not comfortable with it and the emotion of it, then love leadership won't work for you. Other comments or questions? Come on!
My name is Amy King. My question is, if you're co-leading an organization or a project, and the person you're leading with kind of takes the stance of they can't be friends with the people they're working with, or they're leading out of a position of fear, how do you balance while maintaining that co-leadership role?
In a co-leadership role like that, part of it is being who you are. And sometimes what happens is the other person goes, works for her. Maybe I can try it. It may not be that way, and you just have to balance each other out, be the yin and be the yang. One's the yin, the other's the yang. But the fact of the matter is, over time, if you work with that person over time, they may well feel comfortable taking on the same mantle of leadership that you are. But if they're not, well, that's fine too. So long as you are doing it the way you want, because what will happen is the two of you may balance each other out and you'll get the result that you desire, which is success. So. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for coming in, Sarah. I'm not to work with the whole love leadership. I really like it, and I think it would actually work in my profession of social work. However, I was thinking about how hard women have had to work in the past to get higher positions, and about the whole feeling, a woman showing vulnerability or feelings can really look kind of, you get me?
She's bringing that empathy and all that stuff, all that weepy, soft stuff into the workplace. Yeah. But you know what? I think the world's changing. And I don't think I don't think women have to approach leadership in the way that women did have to approach leadership 10, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, probably a classic example of I'm as tough as a guy mentality. You see that in Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's like, I don't think I've ever seen a woman in a dress. She's probably got legs. But she's into the pantsuits. I mean, my old boss, Jennifer Granholm, I don't think I've seen her in a dress in like 12 years. She wears pants. And, she's not really a tough person. She really is a love leader. But the difficulty for a lot of folks is that they're so focused on what other people think of them. And if you are going to be truly a great leader, you can't be worried about what other people think of you. That doesn't mean that you can be Attila the Hun, that you can be really crass or rude or any of those things, but ultimately it comes down to you being comfortable with you and finding that position that works for you as a leader. And what will happen is over time, it'll work out. It may not work out the first time, but over a period of years, over the course of your career, you'll build a leadership sense that other people will get of you. And then ultimately the world will come around to your view rather than you coming around to the view of the world.
I had a comment and question. At one point you asked, why do people shy away from love as it relates to business? And the thought struck me that I think it's because we have such a bad definition, a bad example of love. When I think of love, the first thing I kind of think of is Hollywood. And we all know what that portrays. It's more about passion, maybe a lot about sex, for instance. And so you think that has nothing to do with business. And in fact, there's a lot of harassment policies that guard against that. And I think people don't maybe understand that love has more to do with what you're talking about, which is servant leadership. It's a choice of the will. It's building rapport with people. So I appreciate you sharing that with us very, very much. The question I had is, discipline is part of love. Do you have any concrete examples of how you get a manager to understand that discipline, accountability is part of loving, that you just can't let people walk over you?
If you're going to be an effective leader, you have to hold people accountable. And part of it is when you take on the role of leadership, you explain to people what your philosophy is. And a lot of folks don't take the time to explain, here's what my philosophy of leadership is when they take on the role of leader or when they come into an organization for the first time. And part of it is you got to tell people where you're coming from. If you don't, then they have to figure it out. And then they're trying to piece it together. So you got to be clear about, here's where I come from. And so for me, a concrete example is that I had to fire a manager. And my position was very clear on several things. One is, do your job. Do your job well. Second one is if something goes wrong, let me know. Third one was, if something went wrong and I should know about it, tell me. Don't lie. Fourth one was, if you've lied, don't perpetuate the lie by trying to cover it up. And this particular individual, he did his job well. He did something wrong. He lied about it, and then he tried to cover it up. And I said, that's very clear. I mean, it's not that I don't like you. I love you. I'd love to keep you on my staff. But you have violated the rules that I expect everybody in the organization to adhere to, including me. Thus, you shall no longer be a part of this organization. And that day he was gone. And there were a number of people that called and talked to me and prevailed upon me to try and bring him back. And it was a mistake that he would never do it again. And I said, here's where I come from. And that is if you want him back, I will resign. Because it violates the tenets that I have set forth for the entire organization. And they are watching to see if I'm going to stick to those tenets. If I don't, then I won't be an effective leader from this day forward. And I stuck to that position, and then the person went to work somewhere else. I gave him a good recommendation. You know, I mean, he was truly a valuable person in the organization. He just violated the rules. And that's what happens. So, any other comments or questions? Okay. I'm getting the timeout sign. Hey, thanks, Glee. It's been a pleasure being with you this afternoon, and I hope that as you go forward in your careers, you understand that there truly is a place for love in the workplace and understanding, and you can be great leaders coming from a place of love rather than a place of fear. Thank you so much.
Bill, I want to thank you for such wisdom in your remarks. I think the first time I heard Bill speak, I knew that he was both a teacher and a preacher. I think your style lends itself to really delivering a message with that effectiveness that you're talking about, an ethical gravitas that you exude, and I think it's very convincing in your presence. And as a token of our appreciation at the Hauenstein Center for your presentation today, we would like to give you a Ralph Hauenstein tote bag. I think you get a sense of what's in store for the rest of this academic year when you see the quality presentations that we have in somebody like Professor Noakes. We're very excited for the 21 new members who've joined us. You're part of our family. You're part of our community. St. Augustine and Cicero, both in the ancient world, defined a community as unified by love. A community is defined by what they love together. And we love good leaders, and we love people who can talk about good leadership. We look very forward to seeing you at our additional programs, at our evening programs. We have some very exciting ones coming up, and certainly at the next Luncheon with Leader. And Brian, is there anything else, Selma, anything else to announce?
September 17th, Mixer with Mentors, affectionately known as the M&M. The beginning and invitation likely today or tomorrow. So I'll be expecting that, September 17th.
We also have the Presidents in Philanthropy Conference next week, the 16th and 17th. There is a reception at 5:30, and we would love to have all of you there. And then Dr. Benjamin will talk at 7 o'clock down hall in the Wismore Auditorium. Following day, we'll start with breakfast at 7:30, and the conference will go until 2:30.
Thank you, Mandy. Thanks for those announcements. Thanks for being here to be a part. Thanks especially to you, Bill. So appreciate what you've shared with us. Be safe, and we'll see you next event.